A doctor's prescription begins our look at goals and their importance to humankind. Direction and focus, simply knowing who we are and what we want, are the keys to beginning a life of goal orientation, the start of taking a step-by-step approach to surmounting difficult odds and getting things done. Earl said, "A goal fires our imagination with a mental picture of having something, doing something, or being something better." And as will become evident, the fuel that helps develop that energetic glow is desire. Also on this side, some words on the joy of the process, of loving and being part of the journey that leads to our fulfillment.
I had the good fortune to be raised near a harbor on the sea. As a kid, I used to spend hours down in the docks watching the ships loading and unloading. They'd bring in cargoes from the distant and romantic ports all over the world, and I used to stand there with a faraway look in my eyes, envying those sailors who were so fortunate to see and to travel to all those places. They traveled over the distant horizon to places I could only imagine or read about in my geography books. I hung around so much that some of the mates and skippers finally recognized me and actually invited me aboard. I guess you can imagine the heaven that was for me. They'd take me from the engine room to the forecastle and finally to the place I liked best, the navigation bridge. The bridge had the best view, but much more than that. It was there that the ship was controlled and steered into all those distant places I dreamed of. Once I was even invited to lunch, and I didn't get over that for months. It's strange how something like that can have such an overwhelming fascination for a youngster and exert such an influence over his life. As soon as I was old enough, I was on a ship, and I sailed to quite a few of those distant, deep-water ports. No matter how long the trip, I never got tired of sailing, being at sea, and watching the sea in all its different moods. Entering a different port, even if I'd been there before, was always a brand-new thrill. Over the years, I've tried to figure out why I like ships so much, and I believe I've come up with the answer. Ships operate the way people ought to, I believe, but so few do. Maybe you've never given it much thought, but at any given moment, a ship has a place to go, a direction. That is, either she's sailing to a predetermined port of call, or she's in port getting ready to sail to another one. You can climb up to the navigation bridge of a big far-sailing ship and ask the captain where he's going. He can tell you instantly and in one sentence. Now, how many people do you know who can do the same thing? It seems that most people want so many different things, or at least they think they want them, that they're unable to focus their efforts, their minds, their hearts on anything specific. And all this leads to is doubt and confusion. They're like the guy who jumped on a horse and rode off in all directions at once. They don't recognize how vital it is to pick one port that's important, then sail to it, rest and refit for a little while, then sail to another port. In this way, in not so many years, a person can set and reach his goals one by one until finally he has a tremendous pile of accomplishments in which he can take pride. He has all the things he wants just because he had sense enough to realize he could do well only one thing at a time. There's another analogy that fits here, and maybe it makes the most important point of all. If a ship tied to a dock for some reason had no place to go, she'd stay there until she fell apart from rust and disuse. A ship's engine isn't started until she has someplace to go. Here again, it's the same with people. This is why it's so important that each of us has a port of call we want to reach, a goal, a place to get to that we feel would be better than the place in which we now find ourselves. If we don't, well, we might never cast off. We never really start our engine. We never know the thrill of sailing a charted course to a place we can't see for fully 99% of the journey. But we know it's there. And we know that if we keep sailing toward it, we'll reach it one day. If someone came up to you today and asked you what your next port of call is, that is, where you're going, could you answer him in one sentence, as could the captain on the bridge of his ship? If not, maybe you'd like to give it some thought. A clinical associate professor of psychiatry at Cornell University, Earl Nightingale, M.D., writes, "In my practice as a psychiatrist, I've found that helping people to develop personal goals has proved to be the most effective way to help them to cope with problems. Observing the lives of people who have mastered adversity, I have noted," he writes, "that they have established goals and sought with all their effort to achieve them. From the moment they decided to concentrate all their energies on a specific objective, they began to surmount the most difficult odds." So writes Dr. Kiev in his book, A Strategy for Daily Living. He writes, "The establishment of a goal is the key to successful living, and the most important step toward achieving an objective is first to define it. I'm sure you have at least 30 minutes a day," he writes, "in which to list your thoughts about possible goals. Set aside such a period each day for a month. At the end of that time, choose from the possible objectives you've listed the one that seems the most important, and record it separately on a single card. Carry this card with you at all times. Think about this objective every day. Create concrete mental images of the goal as if you've already accomplished it." The doctor points out that you can determine your special talents or strengths in a number of ways, ranging from psychological tests to an analysis of the unexpressed wishes in your dreams. No one method works for everyone. You might start, for example, by clipping and pasting newspaper articles that interest you. After 30 days, see if there isn't some trend suggestive of a deep-seated interest or natural inclination. Keep alert to the slightest indications of any special skills or talents, even when they seem silly or unimportant. From this exercise, you should be able to get some sense of potential strengths. Whenever you discover a strength or talent, think of 5 possible ways to develop it. Write these down on a card as well, and check them periodically to keep them fresh in your mind. Focus on one objective at a time. Like a servo mechanism, the brain, set on a target, will call into play those mental processes that will bring your efforts to fruition. Your actions will conform to your expectations, thereby bringing about the event. If you believe that you will reach your objective, you will continue to work at a task until you have accomplished it. And he suggests that we be aware of situations that generate the 5 great enemies of peace. They are avarice, ambition, envy, anger, and pride. Petrarch said, "If those enemies were to be banished, we should infallibly enjoy perpetual peace." Old advice, perennial advice, and perennially forgotten. It's been said that we need reminding as much as we need educating. Even Petrarch in the 14th century knew all about this subject. Dr. Kiev got the idea of writing his book because of a young businessman who visited his office saying that he needed a set of guidelines to follow that would let him function without professional help in the face of considerable confusion and despair caused by serious personal problems. So take the good and free advice of the psychiatrist, Dr. Earl Nightingale, and don't be afraid of failure. As Herodotus wrote, "It is better by noble boldness to run the risk of being subject to half of the evils we anticipate than to remain in cowardly listlessness for fear of what may happen." Did you ever wonder where those human dynamos, those people who can pack as much work into one day as most of us do in 2, get all the energy and drive that makes them go? Well, the source of drive and energy in human beings is known. It's the personal excitement that comes from a great motivating desire. If you ask most people why they get out of bed in the morning and slug away all day on the job, they'll probably have to think about it a while before coming up with an answer. When they do, it's usually along the line of, to pay the rent or to put food on the table. Answers like these aren't exciting. I belong to the group that thinks life is far too short to be dull. Shelter and food are things we need, but unless we're living out in the street or starving to death, we're not apt to get too excited about a place to sleep or something to eat. Those who have no exciting reason for getting out of bed in the morning may be fine people, but they never seem to accomplish anything out of the ordinary, and they miss a lot of fun and a lot of rewards they could be enjoying. They haven't the drive to become outstanding because they don't have a great motivating desire. The key that unlocks energy is desire. It's also the key to a long and interesting life. If we expect a person to do something we want him to do, we have to get him excited. And if we expect to create any drive, any real force within ourselves, we have to get excited. We have to decide upon something we desire very much. A goal that fires our imagination with a mental picture of having something, doing something, or being something. In a company we surveyed while preparing these messages, one of the men had won the admiration of all the others. We noticed that he had thorough knowledge of his company, its products, markets, and competitors. He took pains to understand his customers and their problems. These things, along with an easy manner and a good personality, marked him as an outstanding employee. We asked him about all this, and he said, "When I came with this company a few years back, I decided to shoot for a manager's job in one of our districts. I'm doing everything I can to be the kind of man who would have that job." Well, that explained it. In his mind, he was already running his own district. The rest of him was merely carrying out the motions that would soon propel him into the job he wanted. Meanwhile, he was enjoying himself tremendously. The mental image of being a district manager so appealed to him that he found all the enthusiasm, energy, and drive he was going to need to achieve that position. Everything he said and did in his current job had to conform to the image he held in his mind. He was outstanding because nothing less than his best would fit with the goal he'd picked out. Of course he'll get that district manager's job and all that goes with it. People with unusual drive and energy, people who excel, are the ones who have given themselves a mental picture, a goal to work toward. And the amount of drive they possess will always be in exact proportion to the strength of their desire to make that mental picture a reality, to reach that goal. We don't have to worry about setting a goal we can never reach. That's the strange and wonderful thing about humans, something that most people seem to miss. We never seriously desire anything we can't possibly have. If you get all fired up over something, whether it's an executive position in your company, the income you feel you and your family need to do the things you want to do and have the things you want, being the sort of person who makes a real contribution, sets a fine example, helps others on their way up, if you can clearly envision how it will feel to satisfy your desire, well, then it can be yours. Arnold Bennett wrote that the kind of desire that triggers drive and energy within us isn't some vague hankering, some undefined wish. The productive kind of desire is real. It's concrete. It's a mental picture that will never leave us alone. It's always there in front of our minds, prodding and poking, goading us on. It's an obsession, a whip. It has no mercy, and we'll never be satisfied until we've achieved that which we truly desire. Well, how about you? What's your goal? What is it that gets you fired up every time you think about it? If you have such a goal, you'll never have to worry about the drive and energy you'll need to achieve it. But if you find that you lack drive, that you're short on energy, give it some thought. Decide upon the dream that's more important to you than any other. Then begin to make that dream a reality. You can, and you'll find that you've got all the drive you need, all the energy you want. To achieve your goals in life, create a desire within yourself. Then direct the energy and drive it generates toward getting whatever you want. It's been truthfully said, what the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. There's a great fact that the average person tends to lose sight of, or simply doesn't know. It's that each of us has the power and the energy, though we may be unaware of it, to achieve those things and conditions we want very much. Energy cannot be created in anyone, but understand that it's there, in others and in yourself, a great and powerful sleeping giant waiting only to be awakened. The waking agent is desire. So your desire to attain a worthy personal goal will unleash abundant energy for you. All you will need to travel an exciting, interesting, and fulfilling road through life to the destinations of your choice. There's a story about a man hunting tigers in India who was suddenly surprised by a huge Bengal tiger. It was almost on top of him. The man raised his rifle and fired, but he overshot and missed. The tiger, frightened by the man and thrown off stride by the noise of the gun, leaped toward the hunter, but the leap was too wide and he missed his prey. The man returned to camp and spent several hours perfecting his aim for short distances and quick firing. On the following day, he again stalked the tiger. Finally, he spotted the beast at some distance. The tiger was practicing short leaps. It's a charming little story, and it started me thinking about a subject it seems we can't say too much about: goals. Did you ever sit down and make a list of everything you want? It's a very interesting experiment, and you'll make some surprising discoveries. You might find that you already have managed to get most of the things you wanted seriously, or if you don't have most or all of them, chances are you're now in the process of getting them. If your list contains some items you want very much but don't have, you might ask yourself why you failed to get them. Chances are that you haven't tried very hard. Or perhaps you felt, for one reason or another, that these things are completely beyond your ability to achieve. But on second look, they might make very worthwhile goals. At any rate, it's a good idea to have two lists of things you want. The first list would include those bigger goals that relate to your career or the overall good of your life, your family. These might include the position and or income you're working toward, perhaps a higher educational degree, a certain amount of money in your savings account, a plateau of business success, or that beautiful home you've had your eye on. The other list could be a fun list. It might include the car you want for no good reason except it's the car you happen to want, redecorating the house, getting new furniture, traveling to some special place, perhaps abroad, buying a new wardrobe. This is a list of things you just want because you want them. Now here's where the story of the tiger comes in. We should all have the long-range goals. These should be our number one list, and each of them should be numbered in the order of its importance to us. These are the goals that might take 5 years or longer to achieve. They're extremely worthwhile to us, and we should be working toward them daily. These are the goals that give meaning and direction and substance to our lives. But we also need short-range goals. These are the goals that add zest and interest to our lives and fun and break up the monotony of the long haul for the long-range goals. We need to practice these short jumps, too. If you're honest with yourself about the things you want, not idle will-o'-the-wisp wishes that change from day to day, but things you're serious about, you'll find that they can all be yours if they're taken one at a time, and in a surprisingly short time. It's been said that people can have anything they want. The trouble is, they don't know what they want. Get off by yourself for a quiet hour or two and make up your own two lists. It's fun and very rewarding.
An elaboration now on river people and goal people. How do they differ, and what do members of each group miss out on? Why is goal setting an overlapping process? On this cassette side, you might gain some insight to these questions, as well as ponder a point that seems to escape many, and that is, can overachievement lead to running out of goals?
Here are some interesting questions for you. You might want to try answering them. 1. If you could completely change places with any other person in the world, would you do it? And who would that person be? 2. If you could work at any job you could choose, would that work be different from the work you're now doing? 3. If you could live in any part of the country you want to live in, would you move from where you're now living? 4. If you could go back to age 12 and live your life from that point over again, would you do it? Studies indicated that the great majority of people, even though they evince a certain amount of dissatisfaction with their present lives and don't seem to be as happy as they might be, will answer no to all 4 questions. What brought this to mind is an attorney friend of mine who confided that now that he's accomplished everything he's worked and struggled for so long to achieve, he finds himself depressed more and more of the time. He has a fine practice and an excellent income, a beautiful home, a wife and children to whom he's devoted. In fact, everything is finally just as he'd planned it for so many years. And for no reason that he can put his finger on, all the fun and enthusiasm has strangely disappeared. He's listless and unhappy, and he can't think of a single reason why. This has become a common modern melody, and it's what so often happens when a person runs out of goals. This is when the game of life begins to go to pot, and the person needs to remind himself of some of the basic rules for successful, enthusiastic living. And the first rule is that a human being must have something worthwhile toward which he's working. Without that, everything else, even the most remarkable achievements of the past and all the trappings of worldly success, tend to turn sour. Achieving our life goals can be compared to opening our presents on Christmas morning and watching those we love open theirs. We look forward to the day, plan, and work toward it. Suddenly it's there. All the presents have been opened, and then what? Well, we must then turn our thoughts and attention to other things. The successful novelist begins planning his next book before he completes the one he's working on. The scientist always has something new and challenging to turn to when he completes a project. The teacher has a new class coming up. The young family has children to raise and get through school, the new home to buy, the promotion to work for. But for millions who reach their 40s and 50s and find they've done all they set out to do, and that there are no new challenges to give them stimulus and direction. There often comes the most trying time of their lives, the search for meaning, for new meaning. And it must be found if the old interest and vitality are to be restored to their lives, if they're to achieve renewal as persons. If they understand this, even the search for new meaning can bring new interest into their lives. They've got to say to themselves, all right, I've done what I set out to do. Now I must find something new and interesting to do. Getting back to our questions, the thought of going back to age 12 fills most people with a dread bordering on horror. They wouldn't do it for anything. And the upshot of the whole thing is that most people are living lives they themselves have fashioned and have or are getting what they really want, or at least what they're willing to settle for. And when this is brought to their attention, they often begin to get a lot more enjoyment from the life they've got. They begin to enjoy themselves more and realize that things aren't so bad after all.
If you're going to be a big success as a human being, you have to fit into one of two groups, or belong to both of them, it seems to me. So let's talk about these two groups of very successful men and women. The first group belongs to what I call the river. These are men and women who have found, often early in life, although not always, a great river of interest into which they throw themselves with exuberance and abandon. They're quite happy to spend their lives working and playing in that river. For some, the river may be a particular branch of science. For others, one of the arts. There are some physicians, for example, who are so wrapped up in medicine they hate to leave it. Even after a 16-hour day, they can't wait to get back to it. For others, quitting time comes as a welcome reward when they can indulge themselves in other interests. There are some people who are happiest and most alive when they're in their river, in whatever business or career or profession it happens to be. And success comes to such people as inevitably as a sunrise. In fact, their success is the moment they find their great field of interest. The worldly trappings of success will always come in time. Such people don't have to ask, what shall I do with my life? Their work is a magnet for them, and they can't imagine doing anything else. We all know such people, or about such people. Doing what they do is even more important to them than the rewards they earn for doing it. So much for the river people. The second group of successful people are those who are goal-oriented. These people have not found necessarily a particular river and can be quite happy doing a number of things. It's the goals they set that are important to them, and they're quite aware that there are many roads that can lead to their goals. Someone once said, Americans can have anything they seriously make up their minds to have. The trouble is that most of them never make up their minds about anything. Goal-oriented people do make up their minds about what they want, and they keep their eyes and their enthusiasm on the goal they've established until it becomes a reality in their lives. Then they set a new goal, if they're wise. One of the problems with this latter group is that after achieving a number of goals and becoming quite successful, they can run out of goals and become listless and unhappy. But not the river people. Their interest in what they're doing never fades. So if you're going to be a big success, chances are you need to be a river person or a goal-oriented person, or both. The two groups you see are not mutually exclusive. How about you? I read a great Greek poem by C.P. Kafafi titled Ithaca, and in it we're reminded that it is the voyage and the adventures on the way that count, not the arrival itself. Old Cervantes said the same thing. This seems to be a most difficult truth to understand. It's not to say that a person's goal in life is unimportant. On the contrary, it's vital. For without a goal, a distant destination, we wouldn't begin the trip at all. Instead, we'd run around in circles, endlessly following the shoreline round and round our tiny island. Every person needs a great and distant goal toward which to strive, but in traveling toward it, he should try to keep in mind that the fabled land he seeks has shores much like the one he left behind, that its purpose is not so much a resting place, but rather the reason for the trip. Where a person goes is not nearly as important as how he gets there. That a house is built is not all that important. It's the manner in which it's built that makes it great, average or poor. That we live is not nearly as important as the manner in which we live. I think that it's misunderstanding this that often keeps people in a state of unhappiness and anxiety. They forget to enjoy the trip. They forget what they're really looking for, or what they should be looking for, the discovery of themselves. This is the island toward which everyone should journey. It's a difficult journey, beset like the travels of Ulysses with many dangers and hardships. But it gives real meaning to life, and there are many rich rewards to be found along the way, all kinds of serendipitous benefits. It means asking the questions that are hard to answer. Where am I going? Why am I going there? What do I really want, and why do I want it? Am I making the best possible use of myself as a person? Am I gradually realizing my potential? Am I discovering my best talents and abilities and using them to their fullest? Am I living fully extended in my one chance at life on earth? Am I really living? Who am I? These are the questions everyone must ask himself and answer. As Emerson said, though we travel the world over to find the beautiful, we must carry it with us, or we find it not. Whatever you're looking for must first be found within you, whether it be peace or happiness or riches or great accomplishments. Everything we do outwardly is only an expression of what we are inwardly at the time. To ask for anything else is as absurd as looking for apples on an oak tree. So the person who knows what he wants knows what he must become, and so he fixes his attention on the preparation and development of himself. And as he grows toward the ideal he holds in his mind, he finds interest and zest and joy on the journey. He looks forward to tomorrow, but he also enjoys today, for it is the tomorrow he looked forward to yesterday. He knows that if he cannot find meaning and value in his present, it will very likely be missing in his future. Today is the future of 5 years ago. Are you enjoying it as much as you thought you would? Have you progressed to the point you wanted then to reach? These are the questions that make us think.
George M. Cohan once sardonically described life as a process of being hurried and worried until we're buried. And indeed, that describes many people, perhaps many superachievers whom we admire for their successes. To develop a personal style of slowing down and absorbing the magic that is life will lead not only to greater enjoyment of the journey, but an increased satisfaction in the rewards that goal accomplishment brings. On the next side of this cassette, seizing opportunity, embracing the challenge of risk, and setting goals that get to the very heart of your desires. The remaining element needed for habitual, lifelong achievement has a mixture of ingredients. Patience, durability, and will are part of this formula that creates one of the most rewarding characteristics of mankind: persistence. As it has been said, nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not, nothing is more common. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Earl Nightingale offers some thoughtful comments on how to enhance our instinctual need to persist, starting with just one single step. The issue of being misunderstood gets some treatment, as we hear how old-fashioned tenacity can be confused with ruthlessness.
When a child is born, he or she comes equipped with certain basic drives that psychologists have been listing for us for many years. And to my mind, one of the most interesting of these basic drives is the one we might call the drive to go on, the virtually indestructible tendency on the part of a human being to keep going, to wait for one more sunrise, to try just one more time, and then once more again and again. No matter how crushed, how defeated, how demoralized, when all hope seems gone, there is, in the healthy person, a small, inextinguishable flame of hope, like a faint but persistent pilot light that stays alive, much like the fire ancient man used to carry with him as he moved from place to place. It's been seen in the faces of men, women, and children escaping from behind the Iron Curtain, and refugees from countries such as Vietnam, Cambodia, Afghanistan. It was still smoldering in the shrunken faces of the victims of Hitler's death camps when they were liberated by the Allied soldiers at the close of World War II. It's what causes a person to keep putting one foot in front of the other on what seems like an endless road with no destination in sight. And it's this natural drive to go on, to keep trying, that's responsible for man's progress through the long centuries. Almost everyone comes to a place in life where going on seems futile, even ridiculous, when he seems overwhelmed by a suffocating mattress of events and situations, and the desire just to sit down in the middle of his road and let the world and everything in it go to blazes. So he sits down for a while, but then the vibration of the world seems to make itself felt in his bones. Pretty soon he raises his head and begins to look around. After a while he takes a couple of deep breaths, gets slowly, painfully to his feet, wobbles there for a minute or two, and then he starts out again. Often as not, around the next bend in the road he'll find the reason he kept going, and he'll shudder at the thought of how close he came to giving up. His hope lies in movement and time. If he doesn't get up and start moving again, he's done for. But he has this natural drive to keep moving along the road, as long as he keeps heading for what he's looking for. What seemed like the end of the world for him will be nothing more than a bad dream, and a part of the preparation he needed to qualify for the achievement his perseverance has brought. Movement, time, and the law of averages. I remember reading about the manager of a Major League ball club who kept a rookie on the team and in the lineup because even though he wasn't hitting anywhere near what was expected of him, when he struck out swinging. He wasn't just standing there watching strikes go by. And as the manager expected, he soon started getting wood on the ball and bringing his average up to where it belonged. Discouragement seems to be a part of life. But the reason people prevail is because of this built-in drive to keep going.
Willpower has been called persistence. It's the knack of staying with something, the sustained effort necessary to induce absolute faith. Persistence is an essential factor in the procedure of transmuting the thoughts of what you'd like to have into their reality. Now, the basis of persistence is the power of will. Willpower and desire, when properly combined, as we've been shown down through the pages of history and are being shown on every side today, willpower and desire, when properly combined, make an irresistible pair. Men who accumulate great fortunes, for example, are sometimes known as cold-blooded, ruthless capitalists. But often they're misunderstood. What they have is willpower, which they mix with persistence and place back of their desires to ensure the attainment of their particular objectives. Henry Ford was generally misunderstood, thought to be ruthless and cold-blooded, and this misconception grew out of Ford's habit of following through in all of his plans with persistence. For example, I know the story that is reported to be absolutely true of when he wanted the first V8 engine cast, the block for a V8 engine cast. It had never been done before. As you know, he was the originator of the V8 engine. But he couldn't do it. But that's what he wanted, so he called in his top engineers and told them that's what he wanted. They said that can't be done. It's never been done. It's impossible, and so on. And he stopped their talking and said, go do it. That's what I'm paying you for. So they went, and in 3 months, after the most assiduous studying and research, they came back and told him again that his principle, whatever it involved, and I'm not a mechanic myself, but whatever it was, involved a process that was impossible, couldn't be done. It violated every known premise. So he gave them a talking to, and he says, now, I don't want to hear from you again until you come back here with that V8 block. Go cast it. Go do it. I don't care about any of these other things. Go do it anyway. And they came back with it. And the V8 engine was born. It was his habit of persistence regardless. And he didn't let the thoughts of other people, even though he only had a little bit of education himself, he wouldn't let a bunch of university-graduated engineers tell him that a thing couldn't be done. So they did it anyway. The majority of people are ready to throw their aims and purposes overboard and give up at the first sign of opposition or misfortune. Now, you know that's true, and so do I. But a few carry on despite all opposition until they get their goal. And these few are they have been the Fords, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, and the Edisons, and so on. There may be no heroic connotation to the word persistence, but the quality is to the character of man what carbon is to steel. And the building of whatever it is you really want for yourself and your family generally involves the application of willpower along with the other factors necessary. Unless you happen to be one out of the 2 out of every 100 people who already have a definite goal at which you're aiming and a definite plan for its attainment, you ought to think about this, because just about 2 people out of every 100 definitely know what it is they want to do. Now, the starting point of all achievement or all willpower naturally is desire for something. It would be worthless without it. Now, you should really keep this constantly in mind. And the importance is that to desire something very much is right, and that's human. To not desire anything very much is animal-like, subhuman. Weak desires bring weak results, just as a small amount of fire makes a small amount of heat. And if you find yourself kind of short on persistence, this weakness may be remedied by building a stronger fire under your desires. You know, it seems that fortunes gravitate to men whose minds have been prepared to attract them, just as surely as water gravitates to the ocean. And if you find that you're a little weak in persistence, center your attention upon getting for yourself a definite purpose. Spasmodic or occasional effort to apply the rules of persistence and willpower won't help too much. To get results, you have to apply them all the time until they become a habit. And in no other way can you develop the necessary consciousness of achievement. It seems that poverty, by going over past history, is attracted to the person whose mind is favorable to it, as the opposite of poverty is attracted to him whose mind has been deliberately prepared to attract it, and through the same laws. Poverty consciousness, which was so widespread during the Depression, for example, will voluntarily seize the mind which is not occupied with achievement consciousness. And a poverty consciousness develops without conscious application of habits favorable to it. So the opposite must be created. You do it artificially. You actually create something that you really want. Persistence, willpower. If you've ever experienced a nightmare, you'll realize the value of persistence. You're lying in bed half awake, maybe with a feeling that you're about to smother. You're unable to turn over or to move a muscle. But even so, you realize that you must begin to regain control over your muscles. Has that ever happened to you? Well, through persistent effort of willpower, you finally manage to move the fingers of one hand. By continuing to move your fingers, you extend your control to the muscles of one arm until you can lift it. Then you gain control of the other arm in the same manner. You finally gain control over the muscles of one leg and then extend it to the other leg. And then with one supreme effort of will, you regain complete control over your muscular system and snap out of your nightmare. The trick has been turned step by step. And many people today find that it's necessary to snap out of their mental inertia through a similar procedure, moving slowly at first and then
increasing their speed until they gain complete control over their will. But be persistent no matter how slowly you may at first have to move, because with persistence comes the thing you have your mind set on. Now, there's no substitute for persistence. It can't be supplanted by any other quality. Those who have cultivated the habit of persistence seem to enjoy insurance against failure, because no matter how many times they suffer defeat, they finally arrive up toward the top of the ladder.
Have you ever noticed that the longer you look at something you should be doing, the more difficult it seems to appear, and that the longer you put off something you should do, the more difficult it is to get started? A good deal of frustration and unhappiness could be avoided if people would just do what they know they should do. The great newspaper editor Arthur Brisbane once wrote, "Don't exaggerate your own importance, your own size, or your own miseries. You are an ant in a human anthill. Be a working ant, not a ridiculous insect pitying yourself." Strong language, maybe, but there's a lot of sense in it. A person carrying a heavy weight is all right as long as he keeps moving. The minute he stops, puts the weight on the ground, and sits down to rest, the weight seems to become heavier, the distance to be traveled greater, and the work just that much more unpleasant. Sometimes it must seem to everyone that things have piled up so high there's just no way of digging out. But there is. Pick the thing that's most important to do and simply begin doing it. Just by digging in, you'll feel better, and you'll find that it's not nearly as bad as you thought it would be. Keep at it, and before long the pile of things to do that seemed so overwhelming is behind you. Finished. What overwhelms us isn't the work itself, it's thinking how hard it's going to be. It's seeing it get larger every day. It's putting it off and hoping that somehow, through some miracle, it will disappear. The Chinese have a saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with but a single step, and that step accomplishes two things. First, it automatically shortens the distance we still have to travel, and secondly, and just as important, it makes us feel better, more hopeful. It strengthens our faith, and if a person will just keep putting one foot in front of the other, he'll be taken into new and exciting places, see new and interesting things, and think thoughts that never would have come to him if he'd remained at the starting point. And then, finally, the journey is finished. He wonders how or why he could ever have sat so long and worried and stewed about the time and trouble it would involve to do what he knew he should do. If you'll think back, you'll remember that you've always been happiest, most contented, after having finished a difficult project or faced up to a responsibility you were worried about. It's never as bad as you think it's going to be, and the joy that will come with its accomplishment makes it more than worthwhile. Work never killed anyone. It's worry that does the damage, and the worry would disappear if we just settle down and do the work. As Calvin Coolidge put it, all growth depends upon activity. There's no development, physically or intellectually, without effort, and effort means work. Work is not a curse. It is the prerogative of intelligence, the only means to manhood, and the measure of civilization.
Again, these themes are reinforced. Finding your passion, knowing what you want to accomplish, and deciding that nothing will stop you in pursuing that goal. Indeed, if there is insurance against ultimate failure, it is cultivating the habit of persistence. Bear in mind, Dr. A.B. Meldrum wrote, if you're going to amount to anything, your success does not depend on the brilliancy and impetuosity with which you take hold, but upon the everlasting and sanctified bulldoggedness with which you hang on after you have taken hold. In our final segment of this volume, Earl shares some wisdom from one of America's most beloved screen performers. Also examined is the importance of getting your second wind while motivated by what Earl calls an unusual necessity.
Mary Pickford used to say, "Don't look at the sudden loss of a habit or a way of life as the end of the road. See it instead as only a bend in the road that will open up all sorts of interesting possibilities and new experiences." After all, you've seen the scenery on the old road for so long, and you obviously no longer like it. The breaking of a long-held habit does seem like the end of the road at the time, the complete cessation of enjoyment. Suddenly dropping the habit so fills our minds with a desire for the old habitual way that for a while it seems there'll no longer be any peace or any sort of enjoyment. But that's not true. New habits form in a surprisingly short time, and a whole new world opens up to us. For those who have tried repeatedly to break a habit of some kind only to repeatedly fail, Mary Pickford said, "Falling is not failing unless you fail to get up." Most people who finally win the battle over a habit they've wanted to change have done so only after repeated failures, and it's the same with most things. So don't think of it as the end of the road, but as a bend in the road, and falling is not failing unless we fail to get up again. I remember in Arthur Miller's play, The Price, the father who lost everything during the stock market crash of 1929, and who for the rest of his life sat in a room in the attic of a home of a relative. That's failing. It seems some people lack the stamina, the energy to do it all over again or to make a new start. For them, it's just the end of the road, and they come to a full stop. Many lead such superficial lives, have so little depth of mind and spirit that the sudden loss of income or material things is too much for them, and they jump out a window or retreat into insanity. I remember hearing the story of the little boy who wanted to get over the backyard fence. He stood for a long time looking at the fence, and then slowly, with many falls and failures, he dragged a box to the fence. Again, after many attempts and falls, he managed to get to the top of the box, but he still couldn't reach the top of the fence. He set to work once again, this time getting a smaller box to place on top of the big box. Again, many falls, having to get back on his feet, much tugging and pushing and lifting and dropping, but he finally got it to the top of the big box, laboriously clambered to the top of it, grasped the top of the fence, and flopped over. Then he came back home. So if you've been trying to start in a new direction, you might do well to remember the advice of Mary Pickford. It isn't the end of the road, it's just a bend in the road. And falling isn't failing unless you don't get up again.
Many years ago, I discovered Professor William James' wonderful little book on human reserves. In it, he says that everyone knows what it is to start a piece of work, either intellectual or physical, feeling stale. And everyone knows what it is to warm up to his work. The process of warming up is particularly striking in the phenomenon known as second wind. Now, usually, most people stop working at the first sign of fatigue. They say, boy, I'm bushed, and that's it for the day. As Dr. James put it, we have then walked, played, or worked enough, so therefore we desist. We simply quit. This sort of fatigue forms a kind of wall inside of which, as a rule, we work and live our lives. But if an unusual necessity forces us to press onward, a surprising thing occurs. The fatigue gets worse up to a certain critical point. Then gradually, or suddenly, it passes away, and we find we're fresher than before. We've evidently tapped a level of new energy that had until then been masked by the fatigue barrier we usually obey. In fact, we may have discovered that we have third and fourth winds. This phenomenon occurs in mental activity as well as physical, and in some cases we may find, beyond the fatigue point, stores of energy that we never dreamed we possessed. Evidently, we stockpile reserves of energy we don't ordinarily use, and these reserves will go to work only when we demand enough of ourselves. Only a few exceptional persons make any serious demands of themselves. The great majority of us miss the far greater accomplishments of which we're capable, and the greater joy in living this would bring us because we quit and sit down, gasping at the first sign of fatigue. I remember one Sunday when I knew I had to write 10 radio shows all in one day. I got started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock that afternoon I was so bushed I could hardly think. But I still had 5 shows to write, so I kept at it. All of a sudden I felt better and had more energy than I had previously. And by 1:30 the next morning, when I finally finished, I felt great.
16.5 hours of steady mental work, and I was fresh as a daisy. But I felt like quitting after only 7 or 8 hours. The next time you get tired and you're doing something important, well, stay with it and see what happens. Each of us has a tremendous second wind, mental and physical. Passing through the fatigue barrier to draw upon our idle reserves can make the difference between existing and really living. Emerson said, "Vigor is contagious, and whatever makes us either think or feel strongly adds to our power and enlarges our field of action."
Dorothy Van Doren, the editor and author, in Words to Live By, chose some words of Saint Francis of Assisi. She chose the words, "I would finish hoeing my garden." Now, these words were St. Francis' answer when someone asked him while working in his garden what he would do if he were suddenly to learn that he would die at sunset that day. He said, "I would finish hoeing my garden." And they seem to me, Dorothy Van Doren writes, they seem to me an answer to all the troubled young people these days who are beginning life in a world that appears to hold no security for them or for anyone, young or old. Why should they bother to go to college when the atom war is just around the corner, some people will say? Why should a young wife have a baby when the ceiling may collapse on its crib? Why should one paint a picture or write a song or begin a novel? We can't be sure of anything, these young people say, not now or next year or the year after that. Why should we try to make a life for ourselves, they ask? Why should we go to classes or take examinations or get married or look for an apartment or try for a job? Next spring or some spring too frighteningly near, it may all go, the life we've begun. Our world is in deadly peril. We've lost the promise of tomorrow, they'll say. Well, St. Francis put the answer in a simple metaphor. Go on hoeing your garden. The task is still here, the house to build, the book to write, the examination to prepare for. If the future looks dark, so did it on the morning before the first Christmas. And however dark it seems today, however dark it is, she writes, we shall meet life better if we have fulfilled the present to the best of our ability. Today is still ours, along with the obligation to live it to the full. And as St. Francis said, we must go on hoeing our garden.
We shall meet life better if we have fulfilled the present to the best of our ability. The topics we've studied come full circle now with the realization that fulfilling the present is really just the act of persisting, vigorously reaching toward the things in life that are most important. And a vital part of that process is enjoying the marvelous feeling that comes with the completion of short-term goals. This rejuvenation gives us the energy to keep striving toward success in the bigger picture, accomplishing the sometimes larger-than-life goals that are concocted by the imagination but achieved by the will. As Earl said, successful people are dreamers who have found a dream too exciting, too important to remain in the realm of fantasy. Day by day, hour by hour, they toil in the service of their dream until they can see it with their eyes and touch it with their hands.